So this is our joint NHS Research Scotland Ageing, Scottish Dementia Research Consortium and Brain Health ARC webinar. And I'm really pleased to have Bethany Whiteside and Tiffany Stott. And the title of their talk is Autonomy, Collaboration, Creativity and Dignity, Evaluating the Scottish Ballet Time to Dance programme. So before we get into the main event, as we always do with these webinars, there's a couple of other things that I'm just going to run through. And our first thing is the usual housekeeping. We're not expecting any fire alarms, etc., etc. What I will say is we're recording the meeting. We're going to make that recording available on our websites. So if you're not able to stay for the whole thing, don't worry. We get lots of engagement asynchronously. So if you want to come back and watch this again, you're very welcome to do that. We are running this suite of webinars the first Tuesday of the month at lunchtime for every month up till the summer. So do sign up for our future webinars. We're going to keep these webinars going. So please do let me know if there are topics or themes that you think would benefit from a webinar. We're always happy to hear your ideas. Please do keep cameras and microphones off while the speakers are talking, and we'll have lots and lots of time at the end for Q&A. We covered this a little bit last month when we did the first of the series, but I just want to cover it again just to give a little bit of context. So I have the privilege of chairing 3 different organisations that actually have a lot of overlap. So I chair the NHS Research Scotland Ageing Group. I also chair the Scottish Funding Council Brain Health ARC. And I also chair the Scottish Dementia Research Consortium. They're all on the screen, their logos are there, their URLs are there. And if you look at the bottom, you can see the things that these organisations try and do are pretty similar. They're all about building research capacity in Scotland, training, advocacy. And last year, all 3 of them ran webinar series. So I found myself having to coordinate lots of different webinars. And what I thought I would do for 2025 is roll things together. Hence these joint webinars across the 3 organisations. At the end of last year, I asked for feedback on what people wanted from a webinar series this year. Some of that feedback is there in the little speech bubble, and that's what I've tried to do in creating the content for this year's webinar series. And what I would just point out is that some of the webinars are joint across the 3 organisations, but we also have some webinars that are a little bit more specific to the ageing research community. They're in yellow. They'll always be at lunchtime. And some of the webinars are perhaps a little bit more specific to the dementia and brain health community. They're outlined in blue there, and we're going to have them in the evening because we had feedback that having just one time for the webinars means that some people feel excluded. But if we alternate times, we're able to just open things up a little bit more. One other very consistent bit of feedback we got was people wanted less of me, which is very understandable. So for these future webinars, if anyone wants to take on the chairing role, I really do want to hear from them because I want to use these as a platform to allow other people to get to speak to the community and to get to chair meetings. Next month in March, we have 2 webinars. We'll have one at lunchtime and we have one in the evening. I just want to draw your attention to the evening one because it is something slightly different. Dr. Hamid Haroon will be talking about his own work in the neurosciences, but also his experiences of being a researcher living with disabilities. I think that's going to be a really great one. So please do sign up for that, but that will be in the evening. We will also have a lunchtime webinar, so you're spoilt for choice. First Tuesday of March, you've got 2 different webinars. One of the purposes of this webinar series is just to tell people of some of the things that are happening in the Scottish research space. So I do want to do that. I want to just remind people that through the Brain Health ARC, we have some funding to distribute. We don't have lots and lots of funding. Our pockets aren't that deep. But for small projects, for pilot work, for focus groups, or anything that will help you write a bigger application or a better application, if it's in the brain health space, we're willing to hear about that. As well as these webinars, we have some other meetings coming up. So The annual meeting of the Brain Health ARC and the Scottish Dementia Research Consortium is going to be the 6th and the 7th of May, so you can pop that in your diaries. More details to follow. And then through the ARC, we have 2 meetings coming up. One of them is a celebration of the data sharing challenge that we ran last year. We made a big data set available to the Scottish research community, and we asked people to go away, work with it, and see what they find out. And we will find out what they did with the data at the summit, which will be in Glasgow, Friday the 21st of March. The in-person event is actually now full, but you can still join online if you want to hear about the latest in biomarker data research. More aligned with today's webinar, we have a meeting in Edinburgh on Friday the 14th of April, all around the creative arts, brain health and older adults. That one is still open. If you want to come along, you'd be very welcome, and it would be great to see you there. For both of those meetings, the details are just there, or you can find the details on the Brain Health ARC website. These webinars and details of other meetings will be on the NHS Research Scotland Ageing website, and I have a little screen grab of that right here, and that's also where you can see the recordings of these webinars. So that is really enough of me. Let's get to the main event, the real reason you're here, and that is to hear our speakers. So I'm very pleased to have 2 speakers today. We're going to hear from Dr Bethany Whiteside. She's a senior lecturer in the Conservatoire of Scotland, and a lot of her work has really focused on dance for health and various neurodegenerative disorders, including dementia and movement disorders and multiple sclerosis. She's been the PI or co-applicant on a number of large grants in that area. And in the talk today, she's going to talk about research around dance and dementia. And she's going to be joined by Tiffany Stott from Scottish Ballet, who will talk about the Dance Health programme. So just as a reminder of how this works, keep your questions till the end. You can put your questions in the chat area or raise your hand. As you put in those questions, do just remember this is getting recorded, so no rude words. And as I said before, we're always looking for content or suggestions for speakers or ideas for future webinars. And with that, I promise I will stop talking, and I will hand the platform over now to Bethany.
Thank you, Terry, and lovely to see so many people here. I tried not to laugh when I saw that photo of myself, because to give you the inside scoop, I looked slightly shocked because I'm actually standing next to Dame Darcy Bussell, who was getting an honorary doctorate from dance in dance at the same time I was getting my PhD in dance. And I always forget that she's there, but she's been actually cut out of that photo. So we will move to the serious stuff, and I will share my slides and get going. So the plan is for me to talk for maybe, just have to move faces a moment, talk for maybe half an hour or so, hopefully a little bit less, and then Tiffany from Scottish Ballet is going to come in and talk more about the programme specifically, so she can give you more context about the design and the model. So as Terry explained, I'm Dr Bethany Whiteside. I'm based in the Directorate of Research and Engagement at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, which is based in Glasgow. And I've enjoyed a long-term research relationship with Scottish Ballet, which has evolved over a number of years and now involves some PhD students and as well as lots of other activity going on. But this was one of the flagship projects. So I was asked if I would evaluate Scottish Ballet's Time to Dance programme, 2017 to 2020. The main funder was the Life Changes Trust, and it was designed to be a dementia-friendly programme. And that's quite important, that distinction for the evaluation. Sorry, it's not moving slides.
If you just click on the slide again, that should then allow you to.
I got there, thank you. Thank you, Terry. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the field of dance for health, because I'm not sure if people are aware that this is actually a distinct discipline in itself. So the International Association for Dance Medicine and Science is the key international membership body. that many academics and practitioners and dancers are part of. And in 2019, they convened a task force to talk about how can we define dance for health. There's more activity happening, but what does it actually mean? And they took the lead in those conversations. So rather than reading out this fairly lengthy quote, people are welcome to have copies of the slides afterwards, but I'll just pick out some of the key themes here. So firstly, about the very nature of dance. Dance isn't just physical, it's also visual, it's emotional, it's cultural, it's social. So its multifaceted nature actually renders it as something quite special within the field of exercise and sport and activity, but also within the field of the arts. Secondly, Dance for Health is looking to undertake high quality evidence-based research, which of course then feeds into the programs and interventions. So it's very much a cyclical relationship. And this quote here talks about Dance for Health being situated with Arts for Health. And actually it's interesting because within dance, we often think about Dance for Health as being situated between community dance and between dance science. But academics could have huge discussions about where Dance for Health has actually come from. And lastly, the key theme is that Dance for Health is something distinct from dance movement therapy. So the key distinction is that Dance for Health is not taking a clinical approach as its starting point. It is working with dancers and individuals rather than patients. It has a completely different trajectory, a different starting point, but it's very, very important that both Dance for Health and dance movement psychotherapy exist. So from this task force, a definition was drawn up by IADAMS, and here it has Dance for Health provides holistic evidence-based activities for the individual to manage and adapt to physical, mental and social health challenges. In Dance for Health sessions, trained teaching artists engage people as dancers rather than patients in joyful, interactive, artistic practice, which is a very tight definition. One of the debates that's come up more recently is by focusing on Dance for Health and the word for, it's suggesting a more transactional relationship. And there's now discussion within the field about how to readdress that slight imbalance, if you like, in this interdisciplinary, so being led by dance. Okay, so when I started to undertake the evaluation, I of course looked at the literature, and this was a point in time back in sort of 16, 17, but actually these trends, I would say, are still quite live. So the majority of literature that could be defined as dance for dementia literature has these key patterns. So the vast majority look at how symptoms can be reduced or managed, largely through psychosocial interventions. The majority of studies involve individuals at the early and mid stages of experiencing dementia. The vast majority of studies also look at short-term interventions. So there are studies 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, that kind of period of time that dancers are involved. Most of the literature is actually situated within care homes and hospitals, not in an external location such as Scottish Ballet's headquarters, where people had to travel to the programme, rather the programme was being brought to the individuals. Here is a list of the literature, and there's lots of references at the end if anyone is interested in digging into any of these. And there are now 4 systematic reviews that have come out that take slightly different approaches, but again, they substantiate what I just said above about the particular patterns and trends that have been noticed. So the gaps, if you like, that I was aware of when I started this evaluation is the actual dance and dancing itself is often quite invisible in the literature. We don't often know much about the model of practice developed and what's taking place within the studio, how people are moving, movement quality, for example, dance genres. The voices of the dancers are often quite invisible, same for the dance practitioners, the musicians, friends and family. And lastly, there's often a very limited focus on anything other than symptom management. And the key exception here is Katie Warren's publication that she led on, published just before Christmas, I think in November. Katie's based at University of Edinburgh and led on a research project involving Scottish Ballet as a partner, looking at how a research agenda can be co-created with people living with dementia in a dance space and dance setting. So it's really important and interesting to see that we are now seeing different types of research taking place, different foci and different approaches. So what was the aim of this evaluation? I knew what the gap in the literature was. I wanted to do something false, distinct and meaningful. I also had an understanding that Scottish Ballet needed to know certain things. I needed to report to the funder. So these were the two aims that were set: to explore the narrative or story, framework and efficacy of the Time to Dance programme and the model of practice developed by the company. So significantly, Scottish Ballet were actually developing this model as I was evaluating the programme, so it wasn't predetermined. They were undergoing a lot of research R&D themselves. And secondly, to understand the social and emotional experiences of all groups of participants, with an especial focus on the dancers living with dementia. And for the purposes of this presentation, I will just talk more about the dancers just in the interest of time, but the full report, which anyone is welcome to read, has a wider remit. Okay, Tiffany will speak more about this, but just to give you some context so you understand the findings a little bit. The classes took place on a Sunday at Scottish Ballet's headquarters at the Tramway in Glasgow. They were dancer-centred and they were inspired by the company repertoire. So by that I mean that if the company was performing the Nutcracker, then motifs and gestures from the Nutcracker with music would find themselves drawn upon in the delivery of the classes. And of course the dancers could then go and watch the show and watch rehearsals. There was always live music in the classes, and the musicians at Scottish Ballet are phenomenal in how they participate in these spaces. There was a social time before and after class, and interestingly in the evaluation, the before time emerged as particularly important because people didn't just walk in from the outside straight into a studio. They actually walked into a green room with teas and coffees and biscuits and chat, and then made their way to the studio. And the classes were intergenerational in nature. And here we have a grandma and a grandson on the right in the photo. So part of the rationale for being a Sunday programme was to support intergenerational nature. Okay, how did the evaluation, how was it carried out? So I employed mixed methods, which is a particular trend within Dance for Health research. And I used the UCL Museum Wellbeing Measures Toolkit, both the generic wellbeing questionnaire and the positive wellbeing umbrella order adult measure. And I don't know if people are familiar with this, but I've actually got it on another slide to show you in more detail. It was a very lengthy data collection period. Over a year, I visited every 8 weeks, and 13 dancers took part in the former measure and 9 dancers in the latter. And there was absolutely a range of dancers experiencing different stages and types of dementia within the evaluation. And I'll talk about limitations in a moment, actually. So I also had to take a number of semi-structured and ethnographic interviews. So 10 of the nearly 30 interviews were with dancers. You can see the range of people that were involved. And participant observation, this means that I danced the classes. So I was another participant in the class and I danced full out with everybody else. And was then well placed to build trust and rapport and to administer the measures, etc., and to be another dancer. I also interviewed the practitioners regularly, partly because the model of practice was changing, and also there was some change in the practitioners as well, with people moving on or coming back. And the last 6 months of data collection was just ethnographic means. So when I mentioned ethnographic interviews on that bullet point, this is really conversations that weren't sit down, let's press record. These were conversations that I was noting and collecting as part of dancing with people and writing up into field notes. And it was an incredibly rich site for data. Of course, its usefulness is that I could triangulate all of this data. The qualitative data was analysed through using a grounded coding frame, so a type of thematic analysis. And of course, ethical approval was granted by the Ethics Committee at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. So these are what the UCL Wellbeing Measures Toolkit looks like, if people aren't familiar with it. It was funded by the AHRC and led by Chatterjee and Thompson, who are researchers based at UCL, who were incredibly helpful when I spoke to them in advance of the evaluation. And to their knowledge, it was the first time it had been used in a dance setting. And as far as I know, it's the only time it's been used in a dance setting. So the hexagon, you can see it was cut out, and people like the tactile nature, the colours and the words were designed in collaboration with people with dementia. And the one on the left, we used pre and post session, and the questionnaire on the right was just for the end of the classes. So some of the limitations, I mentioned that the model developed over the 18 months of data collection. So there were so many variables in this evaluation, nothing quite stayed still, which of course is a good analogy for dance. There was mixed attendance and people joined and left at different points. And I noticed certain trends such as Mother's Day or the weather being really good or the weather being really bad would affect attendance as well. So as the researcher, I had very little control over the sample, as it were. This was a live, real world programme. We didn't have a baseline. And of course, a relatively small sample of dancers are involved in terms of the numbers, albeit over a long period of time. So from the measures used, it was just descriptive statistics, and I'll share some of the findings in a moment. It is, of course, snapshots of points in time. There was no diagnostic criteria, so I had an awareness of different stages and types of dementia, but the programme didn't formally require people to have a diagnosis. And another limitation from the toolkit was some confusion over the words, and people saying to me quite sensibly, well, what do you mean by enlightened? And me thinking, oh yes, what actually is meant by enlightened? So I would say that the measures in the toolkit was a bit of a journey for both myself and the dancers. What I did learn as the researcher was just how important it was to gain the data in the moment. And I don't just mean straight after the class, I mean during the class itself. So being able to monitor and record things such as eye contact, pressure of a hand, moving to the music, smiles. The toolkit emerged as a really interesting stimulus for conversation. So the questionnaire I just showed you, I read out the statement that said, I felt safe and secure. And one dancer, where a sort of more formal interview hadn't felt appropriate, sort of leapt onto this statement and then had a whole conversation with me about how she felt safe and secure and why that was so important to her. So a lot of the words actually in the toolkit prompted ethnographic conversation. Originally, I planned to go every 8 weeks for one Sunday, and I quickly changed that to every 8 weeks for 3 Sundays in a row. And that's because it was partly important because of the mixed attendance, but also I needed people to see more of me. I needed to become more familiar and part of the setting, and that felt important for me as well. And lastly, I hadn't worked with people living with dementia before this evaluation. My experience has been limited to my family members, essentially. So Scottish Ballet invited me to take part in training with Alzheimer's Scotland. And one piece of advice that they shared that I used for this evaluation was engaging in conversation with somebody who perhaps was non-verbal or withdrawn on a particular day, and how to begin that. So it was wonderful in a dance setting because I learned to sit next to somebody, to mirror their body posture and their pose, to mirror how they were moving and dancing. And often that physical connection, physical conversation would then lead to some verbal interaction. So I found that very helpful as well. And individualized communication emerged as incredibly important, knowing dancers' likes and dislikes and how they wanted to take part in the research. And it was only really a long-term program that allows you to do that. Okay, so some of the findings from the measures. So you can see this one, data points at the bottom and the mean scores on the left-hand side. So you can see that there was no discernible increase in group psychological well-being over time, but improvement in emotion and mood pre and post session is consistent with each of the time points. And this was evident both through group analysis and analysis of the individual dancer scores that were collected over time. And then here, looking at the individual emotions. So again, this is across the data collection period, and the mean scores on the left and then the emotions on the bottom. And cheerful and enlightened have the greatest increase in pre-post session, and active shows the smallest difference pre-post session. And it may be that it was originally designed for museum settings where people aren't necessarily going to be particularly physically active, whereas this was a dance setting where people very much were physically active. So I don't think it's particularly surprising that there's quite a small difference between pre and post for active. It's quite an aerobic class. And then analysis of the generic wellbeing questionnaire revealed that responses pertaining to feeling happy, enjoying company, and feeling comfortable garnered the highest responses. Talking to other people received the lowest responses. And again, I think that's reflective of the dance setting where the chat happened either side. In the corridor, going to the studio, the dressing rooms, the green room, but not necessarily within the studio itself where we were dancing. And a high percentage of dancers responded very often or all of the time to the 6 statements, which again gives us some information, albeit descriptive. So I'm going to move on to the qualitative data now. So we've got these 4 macro themes of autonomy, collaboration, creativity, and dignity, and I'll talk through some of the micro themes. So choosing to attend, one of the patterns at the start is people living with dementia were being brought to the class. They weren't necessarily choosing to go themselves, they were being brought along. And over time, it was wonderful to see and hear from the dancers themselves how they were now the ones that were choosing to come to the class. It was a decision that they were making to go outside, to travel, to come along. A second theme that we noticed is how many of the dancers had some sort of pre-existing relationship with dance. So many of the dancers, it didn't exist at all, but for some of the dancers it did, and it might have been, Kaylee dancing at primary school or early ballet classes, but something that had been meaningful to them at an early period of their life that they were now returning to. And this quote from Sophie. Sophie was actually a former professional dancer. She danced on the cruise ships. And she talked about how her best friend kept taking her to different activities and she didn't like them. She said, I'm not interested in that. I can't explain it. I'm not interested in it. I'm interested in doing what I'm doing with ballet. So that was one of our key findings about dancer autonomy. Secondly, the importance of creating and sustaining an impression. So the sense of giving a positive and welcoming and warm first impression over and over again, every week, keeping up that sustaining that atmosphere and that impression. And part of that was really learning about dancer likes and dislikes. So there was one dancer who, when she would say thank you, it was her sort of it meant that she was feeling not particularly safe, and she was saying what she thought you wanted to hear, which was a thanks. And then it really helped to know how to respond. And there was another dancer who would only like to go up the corridor if they could link arms with you. So all of these micro points are actually incredibly important for sustaining a particular impression. And then that last thing, directing the movement. So one trend that we noticed at the start is sometimes people were bringing their mum or their dad or a friend, and then moving their arms and moving their body to kind of take part in the class and to follow the music, which of course is not what the practitioner of Scottish Ballet were looking for. It was meant, looking for the dancer on their own terms. And then over time, people trusting their loved one living with dementia to move in the way that they wanted to move, and how the class would be supportive of that. So there was one dancer who, the first part of the class where we all sit in a circle, just liked to swing her leg back and forth. And then as the class progressed, she chose to move more. So this notion of active observer became really important. Okay, second macro theme, collaboration. So strengthening social relationships. I don't think this will be a surprise to anybody, but how the class played a role in strengthening those relationships through physical rather than verbal communication. People spoke about the importance of being able to participate in something together that was fun. And people also spoke about how it felt perhaps equal. Dance can be quite a frightening thing. So if you're coming to a dance class, not necessarily for yourself, but you're being brave and putting yourself in that space, then perhaps you're experiencing it together, and that's important. A number of people spoke about how the Sunday became part of their weekly plan or their monthly plan, and this was a very interesting thing. So people coming to the class because they knew that they would leave energized, which would then enable them to do the weekly shop together. So the class having a very distinct purpose. Another couple of dancers spoke about how the mum living with dementia lived in Scotland and the daughter lived in London and would fly up every month. So every month they would come to Time to Dance together to spend that Sunday. And it's only a long-term programme that really lets people embed this into their lives and make it what they need it to be. And there's a quote here from Nicola. So Nicola was a daughter-in-law who brought her husband's mother with her to the class. And she talked about how it improves our relationship because the dementia doesn't matter. It's an hour of fun. This is a fun thing that we can do together. Second theme below is about internal collaboration. So Scottish Ballet have a huge Dance for Health programme called SB Health, and they are a national centre for dance health. And there's a lot of movement that can be with staff and practitioners and freelancers. And what was so important is all of these classes had a lead practitioner and had a support artist. And we could actually see over time how the support dance artists were actually stepping into the lead roles because they were embedded in a way that was appropriate. The dancers knew them. You could still prioritise continuity and familiarity, And also the learning that Scottish Ballet could have from working with dancers with Parkinson's, working extensively in care homes, being on tour. All of this was a site of knowledge that could shape and inform the time to dance classes. Okay, third theme, creativity. So this theme is really about what took place within the studio. So creating energy. I don't know if, I'm assuming people can see it on the camera, but to give you an idea, I'm trying to do it in reverse. So when we talk about the dance of Parkinson's classes, and Tiffany can give more information, often starts at quite a low level energy-wise. People are seated, and then it kind of sweeps up and becomes more aerobic. And the dance for dementia class, interestingly, actually started here in terms of its energy level, and then it might dip, and then it might come back up again. So straight away, body percussion, music. It was incredible vital space in the way that the classes began. Practitioners learned to not use so much imagery and visualization and abstract, which was interesting because this is how dancers often talk. We often talk about the golden thread, increasing one's posture. We often talk about reaching and stretching and picking stars out of the sky. And for the dancers with dementia, short and clear guidance actually was easier, more appropriate to understand. And the choice of repertoire was very interesting. So Scottish Ballet has a whole range of repertoire, and actually making very careful decisions about which ballets and which motifs and gestures were going to be borrowed from and drawn upon. Second one, sustaining engagement. So I talked about the dancers who go and do their weekly shop afterwards because their focus and their attention span was increased. So this second theme is quite important. And one of the things we noticed is how engagement became sustained within and between exercises. So points of sociability, mirroring, partnering, encouraging eye contact, all actually being built into the model of practice in a way that felt organic, but was actually quite careful thinking on Scottish Ballet's part. And then the role of repetition and familiarity. So this had to be managed because repetition is quite often how dance is taught. And it can be comfortable and familiar, but it also doesn't necessarily challenge you. And many of the dancers liked the sense of challenge and the sense of achievement. And I think often within Dance for Health, there's an assumption that it would just be familiar movements that are offered to dancers living with dementia rather than a greater spectrum and a greater challenge. I talked about how important the musician was. So the musicians at Scottish Ballet were absolutely full and active engagers of the class. And what might be interesting for people to hear is that the music was more abstract music responding to the dances, so not familiar tunes. And when I spoke to the musicians and asked us to understand the rationale here, it's partly because, especially at the start of a program, not knowing individual dances, not knowing which music or themes or songs or rhythms could actually cause a dancer living with dementia distress, that could trigger a difficult memory or a difficult emotion to manage in that space. And abstract music actually being safer, but also actually being able to respond to the dancers, respond to their mood, their emotion, their joy, their concern in a way that was appropriate. And other learning was about the wall of sound. So of course, some dancers had hearing impairments or visual impairments, and there was lots and lots of room geography in terms of where the musician was best placed. And the musician was very much in the front. If you think of a ballet class, the musician's often piano in the corner. And of course, that wasn't the case here. And then lastly, the beautiful movement. And the beautiful movement is a quote from one of the dancers living with dementia. So the class was structured in such a way that, of course, it was led, but there were countless opportunities for spontaneity or for creativity and for dancers to lead the movement. To speak about repertoire, and also Scottish Ballet invited dancers to come to the theatre to see the productions and also to watch the rehearsals. And I've been associated with the ballet world since my first class at 3 years old, and I still can't overstate how wonderful it is to watch a company rehearsal. It just feels like the most special, wonderful place to be. You're so close to the dancers. And there was also interaction with the younger dancers, Scottish Ballet Junior Associates also interacting with the Time to Dance programme. And then Another example is when the Sugar Plum Fairy's tutu was brought into the green room on the social cafe. And I don't know how many people here have held a tutu, but Sugar Plum Fairy, there's a lot of jewels going on, and the tutus weigh an absolute ton. And it was something that was very tactile, that people could actually see the swing of the costume and actually understand and talk about what it must be like to wear a tutu, to perform and to dance in it. So lots of kind of artifacts and objects could also be used. This is Ruth, a wife of one of the dancers, and spoke about how her husband was absolutely transfixed, and usually he would be at a concert or something or play or whatever and he would fall asleep, but here he didn't close his eyes once. Okay, and this is the last theme, dignity. So feeling safe and secure, that's actually one of the statements from the generic wellbeing questionnaire, which prompted quite a bit of dancer conversation. And Evie here, who had more advanced dementia, talking about, I just love this class, I love it. I could sit down to anyone that I hadn't met before and talk to them, and they would talk to me, and that's what life is all about. I know if I was to turn ill, I would be looked after. And then the two themes below, seeing the individual. So many of the carers and spouses and friends and family that came along shared the importance of being able to see the dancer that they came with in a different light or in a different way, being able to get to know different personalities or different elements of personalities. And again, this individual, the different likes and dislikes, and that of course extended to how people wanted to move as well, being really important. And then theme below, use of time and space. So Scottish Ballet practitioners learning how to position dancers in the room. People here might be aware of the thing about the ballet bar. You walk into a ballet class, you're a guest dancer, everybody has their space at the bar. You should really wait until the spaces have been taken before you take your place at the bar. It's a big etiquette thing. And actually this totally transitioned into the time dance class as well, people having their space, that sense of ownership within Scottish Ballet's studio. The importance of the social cafe both before and after class. This transitional space before class, I can't overstate the importance of how, just how important it was that people were welcomed in and they're not immediately ushered into a dance studio in order to take part in something that was quite active. And all the practitioners being present throughout. So the practitioners are present in the social cafe, the transitional space up and down the corridors, often had a lot of interaction with the dancers in between sessions running as well as part of the recruitment drive. So they were very much a constant force. And this all feeds back to this theme of dignity. Okay, conclusion. I have actually been, hopefully I've kept to time. I feel like I've been quite swift. So the evaluation concluded that Time to Dance did indeed promote and sustain individual and community wellbeing, commitment, enjoyment and interest through its dance-centered approach, with one of the dancers saying, I feel as if I'm in heaven when I come here. So benefit of qualitative research, you can get some really truly lovely quotes. The analysis of the measures, although there were definitely challenges in using the quants measure from the descriptive stats, they certainly infer that a particular atmosphere, approach and ethos was sustained throughout. And of course, this was 12 months of data collection. And this framework of autonomy, creativity, collaboration, and dignity actually arose inductively from the qualitative data gathered, but because it was such a long-term evaluation, it actually fed back into some of the decisions I made about how to run the evaluation. So as a researcher, I wanted to give dancers autonomy. I wanted the research to allow for creativity. I wanted to be able to collaborate and ask for feedback about the measures and feedback about how I was designing my interview frameworks. And dignity, I think, is the most important one of all. So all of these can broadly equate to independence of choice and decision-making, creation of a particular community, model of practice developed by Scottish Ballet, and how the individual is centred and responded to. So a few ways that this evaluation is unusual, thinking of that greater landscape that I spoke about at the start of the talk, is it was incredibly long-term, and there are very, very few Dance for Dementia programmes that exceed actually 12 weeks. There's only a handful that will go, actually have been able to go beyond that. The benefit to Scottish Ballet, with the dancers informing their modular practice, being able to learn dance likes and dislikes, with being able to train practitioners, with being able to establish trust and rapport. and for the dancers to actually embed time to dance within their daily week, their daily month, their daily living. And it's also extended to spouses and friends and family, talking about taking elements of the class, of course, home with them, and actually running elements of time to dance at the bedside or in the armchair or in front of the fire. So lots and lots of snippets of information came out through the ethnographic approach taken. So I think this is the end. I think there's a final photo for me to show you. Oh, there we go. So I hope you can see the joy on people's faces. And I will end just there.
Thank you very much, Bethany. Now, you'll need to keep me right. Tiffany, are you wanting to share a little bit now?
Yeah, if I've got 10 minutes or so, Beth, you've just done a fantastic job there. So I will not keep everyone for too much longer. But yeah, if that's okay, if we've got perhaps 10 minutes just to run through a few things, that's brilliant. Thank you. Beth, that was wonderful. I always love hearing you speak so eloquently about the work and so thoroughly. So thank you so much. I will not be as eloquent as you. I'm very sorry. I'm very good at showing people in theory. I'm sure most of you don't want to be taken through a dance class right now, but I'll try and just expand a little bit on some of the points that Beth spoke about just now. And again, I will just share my screen because I have got a few slides to show you here. Let me just make sure I can share sound as well, because I'm going to be sharing a video. So as Beth mentioned, we are a national centre of dance health, which basically means it's not a separate building. This is just an acknowledgement of the scope of work that we actually do at Scottish Ballet. I've lost my slides, but I'll keep talking. We do run a number of other projects and programmes as well, including, as I think Beth, you did mention, just with regards to our Dance with Parkinson's programme. We also run Dance for Multiple Sclerosis, which is our Elevate programme, as well as Time to Dance as well. We also have a programme for people living with long COVID. We also do have, so I'm just trying to find my slides here. We do also have our Health at Hand programme, which is a health and wellbeing resource for healthcare professionals. That was developed during the pandemic, as a result of the pandemic. I won't go into a huge amount of detail of each of these projects and programmes, but just to let you know, they do exist. And if you would like more information about them, we do have that. People are just often quite surprised when they realise that we do other things other than dancing on stage, that we do quite a lot of external work as well. Just to note that we don't do this in silo, we work very much collaboratively. So whenever we develop a new programme or a project, we work with people with lived experience, we work with researchers, we work with specialists in the field. So again, when we developed our Time to Dance programme, we work very, very collaboratively to develop that. And the same thing with all our other programmes. That is really, really important for all the work that we do, because we are dancers. My background is dance. That is very much my speciality. But yeah, we work very, very collaboratively to develop this and to continually assess this as well. I thought it'd be quite useful. I found my slides. They decided to disappear, but I think I found them again. And I just wanted to show you two quick videos this afternoon here, which will just give you a little bit of a better background as to us as a dance centre of health. There we go. Can you see that? Let me know if you can see it.
Yeah, we can see a slide. Yep.
You can see it. That's perfect. That's perfect. So this is our video. It'll tell you a little bit more of a nutshell, us as a National Centre of Dance Health and the work that we do here. Okay. Let me know if you can't hear it, but hopefully that will be clear for you.
Scottish Ballet is a national centre for dance health. Our SB Health initiative includes pioneering dance programmes that provide creative wellbeing experiences across generations, bringing joy and wellness throughout Scotland, the UK and globally since 2013. Delivered in the studio and digitally, our rigorously researched neurological programmes include Dance for Parkinson's Scotland, our dementia-friendly programme Time to Dance, and SB Elevate for people living with multiple sclerosis. All SB Health programmes are responsive to the needs of our communities, and we strive to break down barriers and challenge discrimination. Safe to be Me encourages young people to explore identity, using dance to introduce topics such as racism, homophobia, ableism, and transphobia. The Close is a creative programme for young adults who have faced adversity in childhood. Health at Hand offers movement-based wellbeing resources for health and social care professionals, and Emerge supports people living with long COVID. We lift themes and movements from our productions to inspire individual creativity, nurturing the dancer in everyone. The SB Health team dances in schools, care homes, community venues, theatres, health settings, on doorsteps and online, reaching thousands of people every year. SB Health creates space for people to flourish, away from diagnosis or life's challenges, to simply dance.
So I hope that just gives you a bit of a better idea of kind of the scope of work that we do. That was a little bit quiet for me, so I'm not sure, hopefully you could hear that, but I can also forward all of this information, as with the slides as well. I can forward all that information in the video as well. So just want to expand a little bit more on the Time to Dance programme. So Beth, you spoke really beautifully around our aims, our objectives of the class, what we're trying to achieve within these classes are themselves. Just to expand a little bit more upon the actual programme itself. So the classes, they run on a Sunday. They are intergenerational. That is a really important aspect of the programme. So we often have, sometimes we've had 3 or 4 different generations actually in the class themselves. We do also work with care homes as well. So for example, at the moment, the company is on tour. We've just come out of Inverness. We're now going to Newcastle. When we are on tour, we visit care homes with our dementia-friendly programme, which is really, really wonderful. The programme is slightly different working in a care home, because often people in care homes, their dementia is a little bit more advanced. So we do adapt our model slightly there. But we work in the care homes, so we've just been to 6 different care homes in Inverness and 8 up in Aberdeen. So this is really, really wonderful extension of the work that we do. In addition, we do have another resource called Bedside Ballet, which is our dementia-friendly. It's a pre-recorded resource, and it's really for people with reduced mobility to be done from their beds or their bedsides. And this was very much as a result of the pandemic, where we're seeing people being able to join us at home online, but actually joining from their beds. And they were saying, well, we're not mobile enough now to see you in the studio, but we still want to engage. So this extension of the Time to Dance programme just means that people can continue to work with us for longer. It's also a really useful resource for care homes. So for individuals who don't want to come down to the activity space, they can do this in their own beds or by their bedsides, or a family member can come in and join in with them as well. It's just 10 minutes, 5 minutes of watching ballet footage to activate, to observe and to participate that way, and then to physically join in if they wish as well. We also do an extensive amount of training. So all the amazing research that Beth spoke about, we've been able to implement into our training package. So we've done some training. Most recently, again, I've been up in Aberdeen doing some training for a dance agency up there, who are also going to roll out some care home workshops. We did a couple of years ago some training in China. We didn't go to China, it was all online, with all the extended challenges around that, time constraints, time changes, and of course, language barriers as well. But they are now running dementia-friendly workshops in Beijing and in Shanghai now, which is very exciting. So we, from this initiation of our Time to Dance programme, must be 10 years ago now, Beth, and of course the research, we really have extended and expanded upon our knowledge, and then sharing and disseminating that knowledge out with there as well. Just also want to talk a little bit more about the actual model of the class itself. So Beth, again, you spoke so beautifully around this, but it's around, I think the key thing you spoke about is about the autonomy, and this is one of the key things we try and bring into the actual movement of the class itself. So for those of you who may or may not have participated in a dance class or an exercise class, so often these things are led. You have a teacher in the front, they teach you exercise, and you have to follow perfectly. That is not the ethos of these classes or any of our dance health classes. We really try and encourage this sense of autonomy, something to be self-led. Yes, we teach set movements. Some of those set movements very specifically been designed to be challenging to a degree, to do things like cross the central line of the body, to get the brain thinking, to start to think about problem solving. They are very carefully designed to really get the brain working in a very different way. We also do a lot of creative-led movement where we ask the individuals to start effectively to improvise. Mirroring is a wonderful way to get people to do this. And again, Beth, you've already spoken about the aspect of people who are perhaps nonverbal and how to engage with that. Somebody perhaps who doesn't want to join in physically straight away. Just the sense of sitting with somebody, mimicking and mirroring with them. So we often utilize this as a tool within the class itself. This also allows that real sense of autonomy. So people moving in a way that works for them and for their bodies that day. And from that, you actually realize people have a huge amount more physical capacity than actually you might necessarily give them credit for. And certainly within our training, when I'm teaching other teachers, that is one of the key things, is trusting your dancers and letting your dancers lead you and educate you. And therefore the class structure themselves, although as Beth has spoken about, it has a very strong structure. We have strong energy to start with. We use a lot of percussive music in the classes. We are very much led by the dancers in that space, and therefore the teaching artists themselves have got to be fairly experienced and confident to be able to hold that space within that. But that sense of autonomy and the sense of actually being seen, the identity within the class is extremely, extremely important. As an anecdote, the classes I've just been delivering in Inverness to the care homes, it was this care staff was shocked. They were beautifully surprised at how much the residents could do. So they would come in, and we had 25 people in this workshop, and they said only 2 people will probably join in. By the end of the class, they were all joining in. They were all offering their own movements. They were all joining in and collaborating in that wonderful space there. So that sense is really, really important. Be able to hold that space for people is extremely important. Again, just going back to just the social cafe conversation, and I just wanted to pick up here, as well as being important for people living with dementia, this is also really important for their loved ones, their carers coming to that space. It is incredibly important. People often say, I feel really guilty coming to this class for my mum because I enjoy it. I am getting so much out of this class. And we have to say that's the purpose. This is for you as well. So the social cafe spaces is very much exactly, it's a social space for everyone to engage together and to enjoy that space together and to meet other people, other carers. It can be incredibly isolating as well to be able to meet other people who are experiencing the same things. I am very much clock watching right now. I have a whole host of things I wanted to talk about, but I think actually, Beth, you've managed to touch upon most of these things. What I would like to show you now is just our 2-minute film again of our Time to Dance class, because you will be able to hear from our wonderful participants, or as we like to refer to them as, they are our dancers. We don't talk about them as patients. They're not our patients. They're not our customers. They're not our clients. They are dancers. They're very much part of the Scottish Ballet family. And that sense of identity of being a dancer is just as important to us as they actually experience themselves. So hopefully that is come up on your screen. Hopefully I've shared sound.
Estimated that there are 90,000 people living in Scotland who are living with dementia at the moment. This is expected to rise to 136,000 by 2036. Time to Dance is part of a 3-year funded programme. It's a weekly dance class for people living with dementia and their families, friends, carers, and anyone that they might want to bring with them, basically. It runs every Sunday here at Scottish Ballet's Dance Studios at Tramway Theatre. It's accompanied by live music, so that's a real priority for us, that we include that in every session wherever possible.
When people know you've got dementia and you've got things like that, they start to become a bit wary about what they should say or what they shouldn't do.
I've known Ian for over 50 years. You know, he used to write long narrative poems, and to find this person struggling for language, it's very difficult.
It can be frustrating because you want to do something, or you want to say something to someone, and it takes time to speak, as it were.
For people who maybe struggle to communicate in a way that they used to, for example, verbally, dance offers an alternative means of communication, one that doesn't rely on the verbal, but can actually encourage expressiveness to come to the forefront and creativity. Our aim is that every person who accesses that programme, whether they're living with dementia or not, that they have some form of emotional, physical and social well-being outcomes. And we can confidently say that that is the case with our Time to Dance programme.
I think it's something they should do more research into, because I'm sure the combination of dance and music has some kind of magic element. Mum goes to a choir and she goes to an exercise class, but there's something extra after the Time to Dance class with Scottish Ballet.
For myself, it can be almost like a de-stressor.
Yeah,
how you feel before the class and how you feel after the class.
You're
you
laughing.
Feel better after the class. As your mum says, you're laughing.
When you come to dance, it is not a solitary thing. It's a thing where you have to work with others, you work with music, you work from memory, and it brings back a lot of things from the past and a bit of freedom.
I came to the class so that it would help my mum, but in fact it helps me too. I feel really high when I come away from the class.
I feel great. I feel I want to throw up these things, walk out my chair, which I know that now, or maybe go front and behind, but I feel more alive.
I think it's always better to hear from the dancers themselves, and again just wanted to highlight the fact that it's the carers as well, as you say, you know, I'm getting something out of this myself, it's just as much for me. But yeah, I just thought it's quite useful just to see some of it in action there, and of course our wonderful studios at Scottish Ballet. Very aware of time, Terry. I know we haven't got much time left, but I can go on talking forever, but I shall hand back to you.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you, Bethany. I mean, that was fantastic. We've crammed so much in. We don't have very much time at all. I'm just scanning the chat here. Lots and lots of comments. Thanking you for sharing. We do have some questions. Let me see if I can rattle through these in less than 60 seconds. I'll maybe paraphrase some of them. One of the questions, I guess, is saying, how important is it that there's a professional dancer? You know, could this be something that is given to, say, care home staff for them to lead the programme? Or do you feel you really do need that professional dancer in the room?
No, this is actually something we're really interested in exploring. So obviously with upskilling sessions for the care staff, but we're really aware that there is not the capacity staff-wise or financial for us to be at every single location that may want something like this. So this is something we would love to try and roll out in the future. And of course, there's a lot of things to take into board here. It's financial, it's capacity. There needs to be a drive and a want for it. We have piloted this with the bedside ballet pre-recorded resource where we are going in doing upskilling sessions as well. I think a lot of it does depend individual care homes, how much scope they've got to do this. But yes, short answer, yes, absolutely, we would love to. We're not doing it as yet, but I think if there's a need and a want, we would be looking to get this happening.
For me, that sounds like that could be a research project. That is perhaps an idea that could be developed when we have our April meeting that brings together clinicians and people working in the creative arts and people living with dementia and researchers, which is a shameless plug that we might end this session on. So apologies we weren't able to get through all of the questions, but I do want to be respectful of people's time, and I realise it is now 2 o'clock. I just want to thank Bethany and Tiffany again. I really thought that was fantastic, and I learned a lot from what you shared with us. And if you want to know more, we do have our meeting in April. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. Thank you for joining. And remember, the webinar series returns first Tuesday of every month. Bye for now. Bye.